Hello Year 5 and 6. Today we're going to start our new text which is called Touch and Avoid. What I'd like you to do first is think about what is your initial thoughts about what this book is going to be about. In your books, I would like you to sketch or write some key notes about what your ideas are. Maybe you could imagine what the front cover would look like. So today we're going to be thinking about writing a prediction based on what we think the book is about. You can use the front cover to give you some initial ideas. There will be key questions put on a slide to help you, but I want you to think about some of these. What does the word void mean? You might want to look this up in a dictionary. How do you think this is going to help us decide what the book is going to be about? Have you heard of the author Joe Simpson? Who is the person who was climbing up the mountain? What is their reason for doing so? Where is this set? And lastly, have you heard or read any other books written by scholastics? If you have, think about the structure that those books followed. And as a challenge, can you think of any other questions? So you have used your front cover to write your prediction, but what else could we use to help form ideas about what a book is going to be about? The blurb is on the back of the book, and that gives us some more clues, and it is usually what persuades us to read a book. So the blurb says, in 1985, two mountain climbers, Joe Simpson and Simon Yates, go to climb Savala Grande in the Peruvian Andes. They reach the summit successfully, but on the way down, Joe has a bad accident. Simon has to make some terrible choices. Should he cut the rope that holds him and Joe together and save himself? Or should he stay on the mountain with Joe and wait to die? So we've now found out some more information from the blurb. We now know when it was set, 1985, who is in the story. So we now know that it's Joe Simpson and Simon Yates. And you may remember that Joe Simpson is the person who wrote the book. So is this an autobiography? We don't know yet. Where? We know it is set in the Andes. And the problem is the life-changing decision that they have to make. So what I'd like you to do now is, now that you have read the blurb, I want you to reread your prediction and add some more information from the blurb into your prediction using a different colour to make it clear. So for example, you might have written, I predict that a man is climbing a mountain. Well, you now know the names of the men. They could be called Joe or Simon, so you could add that to your prediction. And you also know the name of the mountain, so you could add that to your prediction. If you do that into a different colour, it will make it really clear.
Touching the Void by Joe Simpson. Copyright Joe Simpson, 1988. Published by Scholastic Limited as part of the Scholastic Readers series. Adapted by Rodney Smith. Touching the Void. Chapter 1. Getting Ready. It was early morning. I was lying awake in my sleeping bag. My friend Simon was asleep beside me. We were in a tent in the Cordillera Huayhuash, high in the Peruvian Andes. We were about 45 kilometers from the nearest village. I got up. Outside, it was getting lighter. It had snowed in the night, and the air was very cold. I walked to our cooking area and passed Richard's small tent on the way. Richard was a traveller who we had met in Lima. We both liked him. He told a lot of funny stories about all the interesting places he had visited around the world. We had asked him to join us and guard our things while we were away climbing. I lit the gas on the little cooker to make a hot drink. As I waited for the water to heat, I looked at the mountains. I thought about why Simon and I were here. We wanted to climb the west face of a mountain called Ciula Grande. Nobody had climbed it before. We wanted to be the first. I felt sure we could do it. We had both climbed difficult mountains in other parts of the world. We had sometimes had problems, but we had never had any serious accidents. However, as I looked at the mountains around me, I felt a little worried. I knew this climb would be different. Ciula Grande is 6,344 meters high. It was much higher than any mountain we had climbed before. Our camp was at 4,800 meters, which is as high as Mont Blanc in the Alps. The high, thin air would make climbing very tiring. Another danger was the weather. It could change suddenly. Large clouds from the Amazon could bring storms of snow, strong winds, and terrible cold. Later, during breakfast, I told Simon about my fears. He laughed. That was the good thing about Simon. He understood the danger, but it didn't stop him. He was the perfect climbing partner. Optimistic, honest, and much less serious than me. He said the clouds didn't always bring storms, and that worrying wouldn't help us. I agreed. I often wanted to be more like Simon. We talked about the climb. We planned to do a few shorter climbs before Ciula Grande for practice. Then we would spend 2 or 3 days eating and drinking to get strong for the climb. We bought our food from a village family that Richard had met. There was Gloria, her sister Norma, and brother Spinoza. Richard walked more slowly than Simon or myself and had taken longer to reach the mountains. He had met the family on the way up and spent a night with them. Now they sold us all the food we needed. During the next 8 days, we did 3 practice climbs. We didn't finish any of them because of the weather. While we were climbing, thick clouds would appear suddenly. They hid everything and climbing was dangerous. The snow was a problem too. Sometimes it was too soft to walk on safely. Our second climb was the most interesting. It was on a mountain opposite our camp. As soon as we reached it, rocks started falling all around us like bombs. For this reason, I called the place Bomb Alley. The rocks landed near a large wet boulder. Water ran over the boulder, and there was a small pool below it. It was a good place to drink. Our practice climbs hadn't been too successful, but we weren't worried. We had only done them to help prepare us for the main climb. Now it was time to eat, drink, and rest before we started our journey up the west face of Ciula Grande. For 2 days, we ate and drank like hungry animals. By the end of the second day, we felt strong and ready to go. That evening, I started worrying again. What if something went wrong? We could die, I told Simon. He laughed. but I knew he felt the same. I also knew that a little fear was a good thing. It helped to prepare you. We can do it, I told myself. We can do it. We had to wait another day because of bad weather, but the next morning was clear and sunny. It was time to begin the main climb. We left camp. Richard was coming with us to the glacier which led to Ciula Grande. Simon and I wanted to travel as light as possible, so we hadn't brought our small tent. We would dig holes in the snow and sleep inside. That meant we only had to carry our climbing equipment and gas. We needed the gas to melt snow for drinking water. I thought 2 bottles of gas would be enough. After an hour, we came to an ice cliff. Richard could go no further. He took our photos. "I could sell them if you don't come back," he joked. We all laughed. I watched for a few moments as he started walking back to camp. I knew he would feel lonely while we were away. Simon and I continued up the glacier. We stopped to put on our ropes and the rest of our climbing equipment. The sun shone brightly. The walls and fields of ice all around us shone like mirrors. It was beautiful. But climbing through the glacier was very hot and tiring. Every now and then, we looked back. We wanted to remember the way we had come. Neither of us wanted to forget it on the way down. It was important to know if we should go below or above the crevasses when we returned. By late afternoon, we had reached the west face of Ciula Grande. We made a snow hole below the mountain and prepared for the night. Can we really do it? I wondered as I lay in my sleeping bag. Tomorrow we would know. Chapter 2. A Good Start. The next morning, it was very cold, and my fingers ached badly. At first, I couldn't use them, but I knew they would be okay after I started climbing. I looked up at the mountain. It was bigger than I had thought. "I'll go first," said Simon. There was no time to worry. I followed Simon up the first steep wall of ice. We climbed quickly in bright sun. We were joined together by 50 meters of rope. Every time Simon reached the end of the rope, he put in an ice screw. He pulled to check it was strong enough. If it was okay, he called for me to climb up and join him. He sounded happy. I was too. We were working well together. By lunchtime, we had climbed more than 660 meters to the top of the ice wall. We sat on a rock to have lunch. I felt pleased. In 6 hours, we had climbed almost halfway up the mountain. It was a great start. I thought about what was ahead of us. I knew we had to find and climb a steep, narrow gully. At the top of this, there was a second ice wall. This led to a wider gully. Here, we would dig a snow hole and rest for the night. We had about 6 hours to do all this. Our first real problem came soon after lunch. We had to climb a little way across the west face of the mountain to reach the narrow gully. The ice was thin, and in places there was water under it. It was dangerous to climb, and we had to move slowly. After a while, ice and small rocks started falling on us. I looked up. Huge ice cornices were hanging over our heads. If one of the cornices fell on us, we would be in serious trouble. We climbed faster and reached the narrow gully safely. It was 4:30 p.m, and in 90 minutes it would be dark. It was starting to snow. We climbed the narrow gully quickly, but it took longer to climb the ice wall. It was very difficult at the top, and again we had to move slowly. By this time it was getting dark. This made us both nervous. Finally, we reached the wide gully and looked for some deep snow to dig a hole for the night. For a long time we couldn't find any snow that was deep enough. But then Simon found a huge hole in the snow. We made an entrance, cooked dinner, and went to sleep. It had been a good day.
Today's skill is to use a variety of sentence starters so that our sentences are more interesting and have a variety of grammatical constructs as well. So instead of just saying the car spun around, we've added an adverb there, slowly the car spun around. Then we've got carefully. Adverbs don't always end in ly, but it's a good rule of thumb to use for the first adverb, for an adverb at the start of a sentence. They often do have ly at the end of them. So you take slow and you add ly, you take careful and you double the l and add your y. The next skill is a preposition of place. So you can remind yourself that that's where, and then you can have when. So prepositions tell us where or when something is taking place. So technically a preposition is one word, and then a preposition phrase is a group of words. So at the bottom of the stairs is a preposition phrase. Next would be a preposition just on its own, a preposition of time. So at the bottom of the stairs, he stopped. Next to the slide, the swings creaked. So that is a preposition phrase. Both of those are preposition phrases, but they are prepositions of place. So it tells us where something's happening. The next one is also a preposition, but it's a preposition of time. So when something happens, at midnight, by 7 o'clock. It can also be called a fronted adverbial of time. And then the next skill would be starting a sentence with a verb. So skipping downstairs or feeling intense pain can also be with an ed, but that would just read a little bit differently. So here's the next set of sentence starter types. We've got the second version of a verb. So the previous slide had ing. This one is starting with ed. So stunned, the shark retreated. Amazed by the sight, the clown fell backwards. So the difference really here is that those verbs are in the past, whereas the previous ones are in the present. So if you're wanting to say that something's still going on, you're using the progressive present tense using ing. But if you want to say it had already happened, you can use the past tense. But either way, you can use a verb with ing at the end or ed. Then we have got a simile, so cool as ice, the robber smashed the alarm, or like a steam train, he hurtled down the path. So you can use similes there as a sentence starter. The next one is a conjunction. Sometimes they're called connectors, but we call them conjunctions. So you can have subordinating conjunctions really to start your sentences, like although they were tired, comma, the birds still sang. So you're actually starting your sentence with a subordinate clause. Although they were tired, that part is the clause. The word although is the conjunction. And then in order to save his own life, comma, he cut the rope. So you can start your sentences with conjunctions. You could use a wubis. Some of you call it wasabi, but I call it a wubis. So you can use after, although, as, whenever, whereas, when, until, unless, before, because, and then if, and then it finishes with since and so. Then the last skill would be how, which we would call a fronted adverbial of manner. How is this taking place? At the very beginning, an adverb also tells us how something is happening, but the difference between an adverb and an adverbial is that an adverb is one word, whereas an adverbial is a phrase. So full of confusion, Tom ran off. or not caring at all, the toddler kicked the door. It's telling us how the verb is happening. Hopefully you'll be able to use a few of these sentence starter types in your writing today. I've put an example later on in the next part of the video, but do come back to these slides to help you remember the skills that you can use. Today's task is to start writing a diary as Joe, who's the narrator of the book. And today we're going to start with the first day of climbing. And then Wednesday and Thursday we'll carry on with day 2 of climbing. I've put a suggested outline of what to write about on the next screen, and I have also included an example of a paragraph that I've typed up with the sentence starters highlighted in purple as well. If you aim for about 1 paragraph and make sure that you do look back at the mild, spicy and hot success criteria so you know what we're looking for in your writing. I would suggest that you come up with some chronological order. For today, we're going to go over the features of a diary entry properly tomorrow, so it just needs to be a paragraph, maybe 2, about the first day of climbing. And as I say, there's an overview on the next slides. So there wasn't a lot of time to do this yesterday, as you had lots to do, but we're just really quickly going to review the features of a diary entry. So we've got a poster here, how to write a diary. The main thing to remember is that your diary should follow a diary style. So each entry should have a date, or at least a day, and Dear Diary. Moving on, we're writing in the first person, so we're going to be thinking about I and we. You're going to be writing as Joe, so you can use the pronoun Simon and you can say he if you're talking about Simon, but you need to, when you're speaking as Joe, you would use I or we if it's both of the characters. Think carefully about using the past tense. So a diary is about what has already happened. It's not quite the same as a story. It's very, very similar, but it's somebody looking back at the end of a day or at the end of a week and writing down what has happened. And it's personal. It's what has happened to them. So bearing in mind that it's personal, we also want to include lots of thoughts, feelings, opinions, maybe hopes. You can put those inside speech marks. You can just have them within your normal writing. That's absolutely fine. Bearing that in mind as well, it's personal. So the purpose of a diary really is to inform yourself in the future. Some people share their diaries and they get published, but generally a diary is somewhere you can use chatty and informal language. So you can use your contractions like don't and wasn't. You can add kind of asides. I think in my example I use something like to be honest. Things like that would be absolutely fine because it's not intended to be published in a book. It doesn't need to be super fancy and formal. So you can use informal or chatty language. Your diary should be organised in time order. You can use adverbials to help you with this, fronted adverbials, and also paragraphs. I would just suggest that you organise your writing in sections. If you're going to be writing in a certain amount of detail, which you should be, you're going to need to have little sections, just chronological sections, the first few events that happen, the next part of the day, and then the end. So make sure you use chronological order for your diary. And then finally, detailed description. So that's really what we're going to be looking at today, using expanded noun phrases to use detailed descriptions. You can also use more than one sense so that your description is more imaginable. And also here, similes and metaphors, which we looked at over the last couple of weeks, they can be really effective as well to create atmosphere, to add a little bit more detail. So here we have an example diary entry, or the beginning of a diary entry about day 2, the events of the second day of climbing. I'm going to start with reading it to you. Day 2. Dear Diary. Not sure how much sense I will make, diary, because I've never been more exhausted in my life. Endless challenges today, so different to our experience yesterday. To be honest, the day started off badly. After leaving the safety of our protective snow hole, we chose an easy route through a wide gully. Well, we thought it would be easy. What a mistake! In front of us was a strange wall of ice. Hanging down from every part of the wall were spikes, almost icicles really, like huge teeth. Ominous and unsettling, these ice spikes also made it very challenging to climb. Eventually, we found a strong section of the wall where we could attach our ice screws. So here we've got quite a few expanded noun phrases that I've highlighted in purple for you. So it's just really important to consider the skills from yesterday. So thinking about your sentence starters, trying not to start every sentence with I or we, using a variety of different skills from yesterday, but also the skills for today are expanded noun phrases. Now I haven't really explained that a lot because I know that both year 5 and 6 you will be very familiar with those. An expanded noun phrase is instead of just using a noun, so in this case, after leaving the snow hole, that would have made sense. We're changing it to after leaving the safety of our protective snow hole. So we're just adding adjectives to describe the noun really. Here, instead of a route, an easy route. Instead of a gully, a wide gully. Instead of a wall of ice or just a wall, a strange wall of ice. Ominous and unsettling isn't technically an expanded noun phrase, but I think it almost takes the place of one here. So you could have the ominous and unsettling ice spikes. Also made it very challenging to climb. I've just rearranged that so that you've got a more exciting sentence starter. And then instead of just eventually we found a wall, eventually we found a strong section of the wall. So we're just adding more description to our nouns, essentially to create some atmosphere, to create some detail. So I know that year 5 and 6 you'll be very good at doing that. So this is my example, and I'm just going to hand over. There's a hot challenge on the next part of the slide, so I'm going to explain a little bit about that as well. But if you're mild and spicy, you can skip through that or listen if you want to. Okay. So this is the hot challenge for anyone who wants to give that a go. You have to look back at the example paragraph from the previous slide, or I've copied the relevant sections onto this slide, and consider how do the expanded noun phrases give clues as to how the characters are feeling. So really we're thinking about show, not tell. Rather than say, I felt scared leaving the snow hole, we're saying after leaving the safety of our protective snow hole. So the expanded noun phrase that I've chosen gives the idea that they felt safe in the snow hole and therefore they are feeling unsafe leaving the snow hole. Again, if we look at, we chose an easy route through a wide gully, both of those expanded noun phrases are implying and giving us clues to say that that route was going to make them feel comfortable, secure, and that it wasn't going to be a challenge. And then we have a little bit of contrast compared to the next sentence where they actually, it was a mistake. It's not an easy route and it wasn't a good decision. So we're looking really at how you in your writing can use your expanded noun phrases to give clues as to how the characters are feeling. So if you discuss the next 3 expanded noun phrases, the purple sections on the slide, have a little think about how is that giving us clues and see if you can do that in your writing. Okay.
Chapter 3. A Difficult Climb. Early the next morning, I left the snow hole and looked at the mountain. I could see that it would be difficult to go straight up through the ice. Then I noticed an easier gully to the right. It seemed a better choice. This time, I was the leader. We started well and got to the top quickly. I had thought it would be easy to get to the top of the mountain from here, but I was wrong. The only way forward was through a strange wall of ice. Pieces of ice hung down, They looked like huge teeth. I broke some of the pieces with my axe, and luckily I found stronger ice below. Quickly, I put in an ice screw. We climbed onto another wide, open gully and stopped for lunch. The view was wonderful, but it was much colder. There was nothing to protect us from the wind. From here, the way up to the top of the mountain looked even more difficult. We had to climb thin gullies between flutings of powder snow to reach it. Powder snow is very dangerous because it is too soft to put ice screws in. If we weren't careful, the snow could fall off the mountain. If that happened, we would fall with the snow. Also, some of the gullies were closed at the top. If we chose the wrong gully, we would have to climb over into another gully. That was always difficult. There was another problem too. The weather was getting worse. I led again. We were now climbing at a height of just over 6,000 meters in cold, thin air. It was hard to breathe, and we had to move slowly. When we reached the bottom of the flutings, a storm was coming towards us and it was beginning to get dark. We chose the widest gully. This time, Simon went first. The mountain was covered in thick cloud, and it was snowing. There was also a very strong wind, and the temperature was now about -20 degrees C. It was almost impossible to see Simon above me. Ice and snow from his axe and boots fell on my head again and again. I was now extremely cold, tired, and thirsty. We continued bravely through the storm, but by 10 p.m. we could go no further. We were both exhausted. It was the worst climb I had ever done. We dug a snow hole, made a drink, and ate the last of our food. We now only had 1 bottle of gas to melt snow. I was beginning to feel less optimistic. This climb was taking longer than we had hoped.
Hello Year 5 and 6, we would like you to continue your diary as Joe today, please. So if you could continue with the first day, the events of the first day of climbing, if you haven't already finished that from yesterday. But then if we could move on to day 2 of climbing, which is chapter 3. So you will have just listened to chapter 3, and you will have today and Thursday to do this. We really would love to see your finished diaries if you can send them to us. There's an explanation about how to do that later, or you can use the parent guide that has come out on Parent Mail for how to share your learning with your teacher. So we're going to move on to day 2 of climbing. Keep going with your diary entry. Don't forget to use the skills on the next part of the video. The mild, spicy and hot success criteria, they will be the same for the next 2 days. I've also put the events of chapter 3, so day 2 of climbing. I put an overview of those events on the next part of the video.
We have put some mild, spicy and hot tasks ready for you, so you need to self-select which one you think you are most comfortable with doing. I just want to say now that these have been written for Year 5 and Year 6, so especially if you're in Year 5, they might be a little bit more challenging than you're used to, so maybe take that into account when you're choosing. So please answer the questions into your book. You don't need to copy the question, but just put the number in the margin with the mild, spicy or hot, and we'll be able to tell which one you've done and the date that you're doing this. Please answer in full sentences and see if you can include a quote to support your answer. There is also a number in blue brackets that shows you how many marks are for each question. This is mainly for the Year 6 children because Year 5 we haven't done that in class yet. The answers are also after the questions, so please look at these after you have finished.